If you're creating music in GarageBand, there's some tips that I have for you around the songwriting and arranging and recording process that are going to help you out. Let's dive in. Tip number 1. When you're setting up a project, use your drummer as a metronome. So here's my song that I'm working on at the moment here in Songtember. And the very first thing that I do when I set up a new project is turn off the metronome, because the metronome is very not inspiring. Let's take a listen to what the GarageBand metronome actually sounds like. Right? And yes, you can change your metronome sound. You can come in here to your settings and you can adjust the metronome sound here. But trust me, all 4 of these are about as bad as each other. So what do I do and what do I recommend? I recommend just throwing a drummer track on here. So you can see here that I've used Darcy as my metronome. And if we come in here and we highlight this one, now we can turn off the metronome. And when I record in my scratch guitar track, as I did originally, it's so much nicer because you can just have that drum beat. You can sit there in the pocket rather than listening to the tick-tock of the annoying metronome. You can play along to a real drummer. It's a lot more organic and you'll find your performances improve significantly. Tip number 2 is sections. Use song sections. Now, GarageBand doesn't have the best song sections, but if you click or tap on the plus button in the top right corner here, you can actually set up your song sections. You can see I've got A through to H here. You can't rename them, but I've got another tip that's going to help you with that in a moment. But what you can do is actually set up your sections here. And why are these important? Well, you can jump to each individual section and you can see there it highlights it there in your track. And then if you come back out here, it will zoom in on just that section. So if you're working on your chorus, you're working on your verse, you can just go ahead and have just that highlighted. Of course, you can then go back and go to your all sections here. Now, you may not want to set up sections when you're writing your song. That's fine. Just come in here and set yourself one section of like 200 bars and start recording. But what you can do at the end is come back and actually add them in afterwards. And I've got a video which is linked in the description that shows you how to do that, how to actually add sections after the fact. So don't freak out if you don't have sections or if you've never used them, but if you want to be able to utilize them in your recordings, check that one out and use your sections. It's going to make life a lot easier when you start the arrangement process. Speaking of sections, having a lead-in section is super important. So if you take a look at the start of this song, you'll notice that the intro here starts from bar number 5. Yes, the first 4 bars are my lead-in section. And the reason I have that is that in particular in a song like this one that actually starts right before the bar note, starts before the first beat of the bar, you need to have a bit of room in there. And even if your song starts right on that beat, if you're playing a piano chord or especially a guitar chord, there's nothing worse than it cutting off the very start of your very first chord. So give yourself at least 1 bar. I recommend 2 or 4. The other cool thing it does is it gives you extra time. So if you're playing guitar in here and you hit the record button, you're going to be able to actually have 4 bars of lead in. Otherwise, if you're right up here, GarageBand by default only gives you a 4 count. And that's the maximum you can set it to. So it's a bit clunky, but if you have a lead-in section, you're going to be good to go. Tip number 4, speaking of arranging and speaking of sections, I mentioned that you can't actually name your sections in here. You can't actually change A, B, C, and D. So what I do is when I first record here in GarageBand is I set up a scratch track, and it can be guitar or vocal or drums, whatever you want to use. And then I actually split out my track and add it as sections. Now I've used the guitar track here, but I could just as easily use a drummer track. So let's show you a practical example. Let's grab this drummer track and we'll use the original one. So this was my original metronome track. I'll bring this one all the way up, just to grab it and drag it up there. And if I didn't already have this in place, look at this. It doesn't even have to be on. But say we wanted this metronome track to be here. Here it is. What we can actually do is go to each spot here, tap again, hit the split button, and just drag down on that one. And then come to the next section. Again, tap it, split, and drag down on that one. Go to the next section, tap it again, split it, drag it down. And what we can do with this, in fact, you can even just grab that split handle and move it along and do your splits that way. By the way, if you wanted the quicker way to split, I always forget to do that, but you can literally just leave the split on and drag it across there. So the beauty part of this is you can then rename each of these song elements. So each one of these regions we can tap, we can hit the rename button, and instead of it being called Darcy, we can delete that out and we can type in intro. And there you go. You can actually set each of these. We'll do it again here for the verse. Tap it again, rename. And instead of that one, it's going to be verse number 1. Very cool, very easy way to get your sections, your song sections set up here in your project in GarageBand. Our next tip is the 2-track recording hack. Trademark, copyright, no. This is really cool if you're recording vocals or guitar or any live instrument and you're using a 2-channel interface. So I'll show you an example of this. If we were to set up here, say we're recording some vocals, we hit the plus there, we come in here to our audio recorder, we go more sounds and we want the vocal sound, we want the lead vocals. Okay, we're set up here to record. I'm on channel 1 here. I've got a 2-channel interface, so I can be on 1 or 2. I'd turn my monitoring on and I'd be ready to record. The thing is though, if I hit the record button now with all of this set up, look what happens. Because we're all just... It jumps over here. It jumps over to this track. Now, we don't want that. We don't want to record on this track because it's too hard. Let's just undo that recording. It's too hard to see where you're up to. Like, we've set all these cool sections and things here. We want to be able to see the sections while we're recording. What's the solution? Well, we tap on this one and we duplicate that track. And then we change our settings here. So we go to the plugins icon here. Actually, no, we don't. We go to this one. We go to the microphone. And then instead of channel 1, we make this input 2. We don't need to put monitoring on because we don't want to hear any of this, and you don't need to plug anything into input 2. It's just a dummy track. And the good news here is, here's the track we're recording on. If we set this track to record as well, take a look at what happens now. There's a little number 2 under your record button there, and when you hit record, because we're all just a work in progress. And look what happens. It records not only on your actual track, but the second track as well. And it leaves you out here on the track view instead of going to that crazy microphone view where you can't see anything behind. This is great for iPad, but even better for smaller iPhones where you really need to be able to see what's going on. So that is the 2-track hack. And you can see here the whole reason I've got this entire lead vocal track is this is my dummy track from when I was recording my actual lead vocals. This is muted and it's set to the other input, and then this one's just set to input 1 and we record on it. So there you go, the 2-track hack here in GarageBand. Speaking of track hacks, what about the master volume hack? Now you'll notice here that I've got FX on this track, and you might think that's a bit weird because you're not actually using some effects, so we'll delete it, you're right. But let's explain why I have the effects track here. When I was recording a screen recording the other day while I was out walking around, the track was too loud. It was overpowering. I was trying to explain what I was doing and the audio was too loud. So I needed to turn it down. But instead of coming in here and turning each one of these individual tracks down painstakingly, all I needed to do was use the FX track hack. And to do that, we tap on the FX button here. We just record in any old FX because we're not going to actually use this, but we just need to make sure that the FX track is enabled. So just fiddle around with your filter there, hit the stop button. And if we scroll on down here, there you go. We've got some FX there. We don't want that. So we'll tap it again, we'll delete it. But now that we have this enabled, what we can do is hit this button here, go to our plugins and EQ, go into our visual EQ, and look at this. Yes, I've already done it. So we can, this is defaulted to 0. You can turn the entire track up or you can turn the entire track down. So if everything's too quiet and you want to have a master volume up, you can do that. If like this one, it's all too loud, we can turn it down, which is exactly what I did using this trick. And that is why the volume can be now nice and level. If we play it back now. Oh, just a work in progress. If we take it back to that original one, so if we come back in here to, we've got to go back to the track, go back to the FX track, boom, and come in here, then we can actually do it. So if we went the other way, it's going to be louder. Nobody's got it. Too loud, right? So yeah, we can adjust that here in our master track. So while GarageBand iOS doesn't have a master track, we can kind of create one using the master track hack. Speaking of tracks, naming your tracks is super important. If we scroll down to the bottom here, you'll notice that I haven't taken my own advice here. This is a do as I say, not as I do, because I recorded all these tracks while I was out walking around and I haven't renamed them. So I don't now know which one of these is the verse or the chorus idea or some other random idea here. So I need to do some work to rename these tracks. However, the ones that I started with here, I did a pretty good job. So we know that this is my section guide track that we talked about before. We've got my lead vocal harmony, my lead vocals there, my backing vocals, my metronome here, and my acoustic guitar. So get into the habit of naming your tracks. If you're not sure how to do that, if I wanted to rename, say, my lead vocals, which I probably do, I can tap on this one, tap again, and hit the rename button. Make sure you're tapping right on the icon there. You will then get this option here, and we can just call this. What I tend to do is I tend to write Vox, and then use brackets to say lead. That way I can have Vox lead, Vox harmony, Vox backing, and you have a consistent naming convention. So use your track names, otherwise you'll end up looking like this, a complete mess, just like Pete. Speaking of these messy tracks, I've got another tip for you here, and that is you don't always have to know how to play something, or at least when you're writing it, you don't need to know how to play it. And my example here is that when I was out walking, and you can see that video linked down in the description as part of Songtember, I actually recorded in a bunch of little ideas here. And these are things that aren't necessarily going to be singing or backing vocals. They may be an instrument, but you can shortcut the situation here by actually recording them in. So let's embarrass me and take a listen to some of these things that I've recorded here. So here's one, and again, because I didn't name them or label them, I don't know what each one is. So let's take a listen to this. So this is a pad idea. So what we can do here, because I did a bad job labeling, we'll do a quick rename here, and we can just go pad idea. And that way I know that that's what this is. So if we bring this back into the mix, this is the sort of thing that this one's doing. Nobody's knowing all they can. Now, is that going to be backing vocals? Maybe. Or maybe that'd actually be cool as an organ sound. So what we can do here is, now that we've got that idea, we can replicate that. Now that we're back in the studio, we can replicate that out. So if we hit the plus button here, let's just go and find a keyboard sound, shall we? So we'll go to our keyboards and we'll go into more sounds. And I reckon this is be an electric piano. So let's grab the electric piano maybe and use this as a pad. So yeah, so we can use this. And what we can do is line this piano up with the original track that we're trying to replicate here. So we'll come over to here and just pop it underneath, and we'll just play out these notes. So here's the pad idea. It sounds like this. Right. So that's what we're going to play along to. So this time we will put a metronome on just so that we can sort of play along here. We'll go back to our keyboard and we'll work out. So this is going to be A, E, F, D. So if we hit the record button here, we can play these in. 2, 3, 4. So that's the pad idea that we had there, and now we can really quickly work out what we were actually trying to play here. And now instead of having this track in here, we can mute that one out, bring this one into our mix, and suddenly nobody's knowing all. We've got our idea there, and we're like, I don't know if that electric piano, maybe that would be better as some strings. Well, then guess what? We're in our virtual instrument now. We can change this to whatever we want. We tap in the middle here, and we want this to be some strings. We can go to our other section here, throw on the string sustain, and then suddenly we've got a string pad that we can try. Nobody's knowing all they can. Yeah, maybe not. So, but that's a quick way to actually gather your ideas. If I try to play these parts in while I'm stumbling around the place, A, it's not going to be safe, and B, it's going to be much harder because I can sing stuff in a lot better and easier than I can actually play it in. Another thing that I love to do when I get to this stage where I've got a bit of a jam going on, sometimes your tracks kind of sound like they've all been recorded separately. You know why? Because they have been. And sometimes just adding a little tweak of reverb and echo or delay can really help. And GarageBand makes it super simple for this, because if we come in here to our plugins and EQ, we don't even have to come in here and play around with any of our individual track plugins. We can use the master effects. So what I tend to do, you can see here that on my vocals, I've got quite a bit of delay and reverb, and you would have heard that when I was playing this before. Let's take a listen. Oh, just a work in progress. So I've got again, a reverb here. I've got some medium hall reverb, and I've got some dark quarter note echo. So you can put whatever sort of default one, but the reason this is cool is this basically creates your space. So now that I've got the vocals like that, when I come down here and I start looking at other instruments, so we come to our guitar, I've got the same. I've got a little bit less because I don't want them all to have as much of that, but the guitar's also got a little bit. If we listen to this, and just hear how you can hear it sounds like it's in that same space. You bring the guitar and the vocals together and they sound like they're in the one place. So one of the problems when we're doing multi-tracking in our home studios is all your tracks don't sound like they're together. There's no kind of shared space, whereas now, just a work in progress. Nobody's got it figured out. So you get that feeling that you're all within that space. Now we can change this later. You can adjust your plugins and EQ, but even when you're recording, remember, mixing on the go can save you a lot of time, and it can mean that you're hearing the song more like what it's going to sound like when you actually finish it. So use your master effects to create a space to bring your instruments together. One of the things that can happen when you're recording in GarageBand is you can make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Mistakes make you better. However, you don't want to make a mistake that's going to ruin your mix. So version control is something that I highly recommend. Now, when I hit the save button here, the top left, this is going to take me out here to my screen. And you'll notice I've already got 4 versions of this song. Now I'm about to make some pretty significant changes to this song. So before I do that, what I'm going to do is duplicate this project to make a version 5. And to do that, all we do is tap and hold on this one and then hit the duplicate button. There you go. It creates version 5. That then uploads to the cloud and we've got another version. The beauty of this is if I come in here to version 5 and I do a whole bunch of recording or changing or deleting and I completely mess it up, guess what? No harm, no foul. Come back out here, grab version 4, and we're back to where we started from. We can just reduplicate and restart. Now, if we don't do that, yes, you can undo things, but remember in GarageBand, as soon as you hit that button and save, your undo history goes away. So if we come back in here, there is no undo, it's gone. So if you overwrite a track, if you make significant changes to plugins, you're not going to be able to get them back. You're going to have to go back and reset everything, or even worse, if you've recorded over another piece of audio accidentally, it's gone. That's the thing. You do have non-destructive editing, meaning that you can, bring in, so if you've got a take here, you can bring in other parts of takes and you can move things around. That's all cool, except for when you actually close out, because it saves out and you can't undo. So use your version control and make sure that if you're making significant changes, you've got a backup version that you can go back to. And final bonus, number 11 tip, is to use your iCloud drive storage. Now, if you're using GarageBand here on iOS, if we save out of here, there's 2 places you can store your files. You can go to the on my iPad or on my iPhone location, and you'll have this folder here. This is where your GarageBand file transfer folder sits, and that's all that you should be putting in there. Why? Because it doesn't back up. You would need to manually back up your files. Now, there are ways to do that, and I've got a heap of videos here on the channel, linked in the description. You can check out if you want to do that. But my strong recommendation is to use iCloud Drive. Now, you'll get free iCloud Drive storage, just a little bit of it, with any iPhone or iPad, because when you get an Apple account, you get it. I have upgraded my storage so that I get the full 2 terabytes. And yes, you do have to pay for that. It's about $15 a month here in Australia, $10 a month for the US and Canada and other locations. However, it just means that everything can be stored in one place. And it means when you're doing things like version control that we mentioned in the last tip, you got plenty of space to do that. But even if you've only got a small amount of space, and even if you can only work on one project at a time, if it's your active project, make sure you're here in iCloud Drive in the GarageBand for iOS folder. And the other thing that I recommend doing is creating a separate subfolder for each project. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of overkill, but and look, I do have like an ideas folder here where I just have a bunch of ideas. But when you're working on a particular song, having its own folder here just tidies things up and makes it really, really simple so that you can have all of your versions. You can use your version control. And guess what? If my iPhone or my iPad goes for a swim, it is backed up. It is in the cloud and it's not going anywhere. So it gives you that redundancy. It also means that when I go out and about and I grab my iPhone, it can be instantly accessible on my iPhone because they both use the same iCloud Drive account. So have all of your stuff, all of your eggs in the one basket and you won't go wrong.